Hello and welcome to Better Work Days, a show dedicated to helping everyday professionals create better days at work. I'm your host, Andy Morrison from Real Custom Training, where we design and deliver professional development workshops that are relevant, engaging, actionable, and lasting. Each week on Better Work Days, we'll be taking a look at a specific concept, skill, or story that we use in our workshops. We'll make sure that they're easy to understand, fun to learn about, and most importantly, that they can be applied immediately in the workplace as soon as you finish the episode. Thank you for joining us. It's time for Better Work Days from Real Custom Training. Hey everybody, welcome to the latest episode of Better Work Days. I'm your host, Andy Morrison from Real Custom Training. And in this week's episode, we're going to ask and we're going to answer this question. What is compassionate leadership? Now, if you're tuned in at all to the professional development world, if you're go to LinkedIn every once in a while, you probably see and hear a lot of talk about empathy in the workplace. It's kind of a darling in the professional development movement right now, is this idea that empathy is the way to lead and the way to be in the workplace. And it's not that empathy is a bad thing. It's an absolutely necessary thing in the workplace. But what can happen is you can actually be too empathetic. And what the experts whose work we're pulling from this week suggest is that you connect with your employees through empathy, but that you lead with compassion. So I want to break down the difference between the two and then show you a matrix about compassionate leadership so that you can try to determine whether you have the right combination of compassion and managerial competence. Now, as I like to do, I'll show you the book that we're pulling from, okay? This is Compassionate Leadership, How to Do Hard Things in a Human Way. It's by Rasmus Hougaard, Jacqueline Carter with Marissa Afton and Moses Mahan. And how to do things, the hard things in a human way is a perfect subtitle for it because that's one of the biggest challenges that leaders and managers have. And we hear this from the folks that we work with at Real Custom Training. When we talk about hard things, we're talking about necessary evils that come with a leadership role. So these are the decisions you make, actions you take that negatively impact others, but will lead to a better result in the long term. So when we talk to folks in our workshops, they tell us that for them, some of these hard things or necessary evils include top of the list is always terminating employees or disciplining employees, putting people on performance improvement plans and things like that. Having to give negative feedback, having to give constructive feedback, having to say no to employees when they've made a request that's really important to them. It's really the people stuff, you know. It's not the hard things like, for me, spreadsheets are difficult, okay? And anything financial is difficult for me, and that's a growth area. We're not talking about those types of technical competencies that can prove challenging. We're talking about interpersonal challenges that have to do with other people on a human level, and specifically things that you have to do with other people that are going to negatively impact them, but you have determined that despite that negative impact, it is the best thing to do, sometimes for that individual and always for the organization. So in the book, Compassionate Leadership, they define compassion this way. It's your understanding of someone else's experience plus your willingness to act to support them. So it's a combination of your understanding of someone else's experience and your willingness to act to support them. And they have this great chart, okay? If you're watching on the stream, you can see it. If you're listening, I'll try to describe it for you. On the horizontal axis, going from left to right, less to more, is your understanding of someone else's experience. And then the vertical axis, going from less to more, bottom to top, is your willingness to act to support. So when you don't really understand someone else's experience and you're not really willing to act to support them, you fall into this zone of pity. That's where you really feel sorry for someone's situation. And a great analogy I heard for this was, imagine somebody that has to hold up a giant boulder, okay? If you haven't really thought about that experience and you're not really willing to help that person, then you might just catch yourself saying, yeah, that stinks. It's really awful that there's people in the world that have to carry huge boulders. And then you're probably moving on pretty quickly. All right. If you have a little more understanding of their experience and a little more willingness to act out of support, you move into the sympathy zone. That's where you're really feeling sorry for the individual, not just the general situation, but the individual. That might mean you see someone who's holding up that giant boulder and you feel a little pang in your heart and some sympathy goes out to them, but you're still not acting to support them. You're not actively trying to help them, but you have thought a little bit more about what it would be like to have to hold up that huge boulder. Now, empathy is possible when you have a greater deal of understanding of someone else's experience and more of a willingness to act to support. And empathetic really means I feel with you. So that person holding up the giant boulder, you've kind of put themselves in their shoes and you almost start to feel that pressure yourself of, wow, what would it be like to have to hold up that giant boulder? Do I remember when I've had to do similar things in life? Okay, so you're feeling with them. An important thing to stress, we did a workshop and we had a lot of folks in there who worked with populations of people. I don't want to give away too much, but populations of people that have been through some really traumatic things. And their point was this notion of understanding someone else's experience. They said, can you ever really 100% understand someone else's experience if you haven't been through it yourself? And I don't think you can, but I don't think that should stop you from striving to be empathetic. Maybe you haven't been through the exact same thing, but you can at least do your best to try to imagine what that person must be feeling and feel it alongside them. But the problem that they point out here, okay, to go back to our hoisting up the giant boulder analogy, is let's say your employee is the one with the giant boulder and you empathize with them. So now they're under the strain of a giant boulder and you're feeling the same strain as them. What the book argues is that that is a poor mind frame in which you should make decisions. That's why they say don't lead with empathy. It's good for the employee to connect with them and let them know you're feeling with them and you're trying to understand their perspective. But in order to move into the compassion zone, you have to combine that understanding of their experience with a willingness to act to support. And that's what it means to be compassionate in the workplace. It's, I feel with you and I'm here to help you. So what they suggest is if you've got an employee in front of you, they call it the empathic hijack, where empathy can really take over, okay? And that can be a good thing for leaders to use to relate to their employees and try to see things from their perspective. But what they suggest is when that happens, before you go into decision-making mode, you have to take a big step back and kind of let that empathy flood from you. Let those feelings go, because then you'll be in a better position to try to make the best decision possible to help that employee. So that's the big difference with compassionate leadership versus empathetic leadership. Compassionate leadership means you're feeling empathy or you have felt empathy for them, but now you're putting the emphasis on action and trying to help that individual. So they suggest to think of it as this, that leadership's truly compassionate when the leader's actions are motivated by positive intentions for the employee, as well as genuine concern for other individuals, other employees, and the organization itself. It's all about balancing those two things. So as we always do, let's pick on Rocky here, okay? I want you to imagine you've got an employee named Rocky, and Rocky fields customer service calls and walk-ins, okay, at your front desk. And Rocky's got some new kids at home. You know, his life's changing. Work from home is a big thing a lot of people are interested in. And Rocky has come to you and said, can we try to work out a way for me to be able to work from home a few days a week? All right. In that scenario, your personal positive intentions for Rocky, the employee, are, I like Rocky. I want Rocky to achieve work-life balance. Okay. And that's where you're probably going to be feeling empathetic with Rocky of, oh, I know what it's like to be under that strain. I know what it's like to wish you could work from home in order to balance those things better. But you've got to balance that with your strategic positive intention. And that strategic positive intention might mean that you really, from an organizational perspective, you need Rocky's butt in that seat at 9 a.m. every day. It doesn't even have to do with Rocky, the individual. It has to do with the role that Rocky occupies for your organization. The person in that role needs to be at that desk at 9 a.m. Monday through Friday, because you have a lot of people who walk through the doors who don't want to have to do a Zoom call with somebody. They're walking through the doors because they want to talk to somebody face to face. And the role that Rocky occupies, their responsibility is to give the customer that face to face experience. So you can see those two things are at odds with one another. It's creating a conflict. What Rocky needs and wants isn't possible if the organization is also going to get what it needs and wants. And in order to make a decision here, when your personal intentions, your positive intentions for the employee themselves and your positive intentions for the organization are at odds, they say you need to have a combination of compassion and wisdom. And they define wisdom as a really deep understanding of the competencies necessary to lead people to deliver on organizational priorities. In other words, you need to be compassionate, but you need to be a good leader and a good manager as well. You need to be a good, effective steward of the organization and its resources. And you need to make sure that you're not allowing your positive intentions for the employee themselves to outweigh your positive intentions for the organization. And when those two things are at odds, that's where compassion is going to come into play, because you may need to sit Rocky down and say no to his request. Okay. And that's one of the necessary evils. You know, it means a lot to him. You know, he's going to be hurt by hearing the no. You know, it might even down the road mean losing that employee. That's going to be a tough conversation to have, but you're doing it compassionately, which means you're doing it in a way that says to Rocky, even though I'm not giving you what you want here, I'm still here to help you. Are there other positions within the organization that we could look at, Rocky, where maybe we transition you away from the role you're in now to another role that does have more flexibility, that could be done in a hybrid format? Maybe it means talking to Rocky about, hey, we can't grant that request, but this is something that really matters to you. So I understand if this might mean you start looking for opportunities elsewhere. And if that is the case, I will help you. I will give you a good recommendation. I'll even look for you. So the point is, you're delivering the bad news, but you're trying to send the message to the employee that despite not giving you what you want, I am still here for you. I am still here to help you. Somebody in one of our workshops recently said they had to write up an employee, and that when they talked to the employee about the issue the employee was having and why it was occurring, the manager who was writing them up was able to give them some great suggestions on how to fix the issue. And they said the employee at the end ended up thanking them for writing them up. So that's a great example of compassionate leadership. That manager was doing what they needed to do. They had to write up the employee. That's one of those hard things that a lot of managers tell us they struggle with. But they did it in a way that conveyed to the employee, I've been in similar situations. I know how you must be feeling, and I've got to do this thing. I've got to write you up, but how can I help you? I am here to help you nonetheless. That's compassionate leadership in action. If you can do something like write up an employee and have them thank you afterwards, you're doing it right. You're being a compassionate leader in the workplace. So the last thing I want to show you is this compassionate leadership matrix. Okay. So it's a matrix. It's 4 quadrants. From left to right, you've got a scale of low wisdom. So let's think of that as low managerial competence to high wisdom, high managerial competence. Okay. In other words, all the way to the left, incompetent boss, all the way to the right, rock star boss, knows what they're doing. From top to bottom, okay, the dividing vertical line is low compassion to high compassion. So basically what they say in this book is that when you look at leaders, they're going to be a combination of these qualities. So let's look at this first quadrant. We'll look in the upper left quadrant, which means we're talking about a leader who has low wisdom, but high compassion. Low wisdom plus high compassion. They call this the caring avoidance style. And basically what that means is that your empathy is precluding action. So that would mean, we'll go to the Rocky scenario. This would be a leader, perhaps a young, inexperienced leader, who's so empathetic about Rocky's situation, but they lack the managerial prowess to deliver the bad news to Rocky, that they just don't take any action. They just keep letting Rocky come in late or miss days and things like that because their empathy is basically getting in the way of them taking action. Okay. Beneath that, the bottom left quadrant, this is someone with low wisdom, low competence, and low compassion. That's ineffective indifference. That means you lack both empathy and action. So if you've ever had a boss who was totally checked out, didn't seem to care about you, didn't seem to care about other employees, didn't seem to really care about their job or their goals or their results, you were dealing with a boss that was in the ineffective indifference quadrants in the compassionate leadership matrix. How about the bottom right quadrant? This means it's a boss who has low compassion, but very high wisdom, very high competence. Okay. That is what they refer to as the uncaring execution quadrant or uncaring execution style. That means the boss only cares about results and they act accordingly. So if you've ever worked for, okay, or with a boss who got results, was really good at getting results, but everybody hated them. They had high turnover. None of their employees were moving up the ladder. None of them were getting promoted. Their employees were either quitting or transferring out of their department at the first possible chance. Then you were dealing with somebody who had the uncaring execution style. It means they're really low compassion. They don't really care about the people, but they're competent enough to get the results. And I think a lot of organizations are no longer accepting of that style. You know, I think the thinking used to be, well, if you're getting the results, what else matters? Well, things like turnover and retention matter. It's possible to get results out of people, but if you're getting results out of people, but driving them into the ground and making it clear to them you don't really care about them as individuals, you're going to have a hard time holding on to those individuals. So you may be getting some results that you want, but in terms of retention and turnover and employee development and succession planning, you're not going to get the results that you want if you have leaders that are using the uncaring execution style. So the sweet spot on this matrix is when you have a combination of high wisdom and high compassion. That's called wise compassion. And that means you're effectively and you're humanely balancing the needs of the employee and the organization. It's like that example I used before. If you can genuinely, I'm not saying to BS anybody, if you can genuinely write up an employee, but do so in a way that's so helpful to them that they end up thanking you. Or I've had some people tell me stories about having to talk to employees about terminating them, and it's just not a good organizational fit. But in a similar way, they tried to help the employee as much as they can with the transition. And even then, some managers have told me they've had employees that they've terminated end up thanking them for being frank enough to have that conversation with them. That's wise compassion. That's compassionate leadership in action. So what I'm going to ask you to do for your homework in between podcast episodes is the same thing that we ask people in our workshops when we show them this matrix. All right. Caring avoidance. You're so empathetic you can't take action. Ineffective indifference. You lack both empathy and action. Uncaring execution. You only care about results and you act accordingly. Wise compassion. You effectively and humanely balance the needs of the employee in the organization. Do some self-reflection and ask yourself, which of those styles do you think you most routinely embody in your own leadership? A lot of our participants will tell us that at times they feel like they're in the caring avoidance quadrant because they care about the employees, but they recognize after seeing this model that, yeah, I think sometimes the empathy is preventing me from having those difficult conversations or doing that hard thing that I've been avoiding. And that's a very human thing. In this book, they talk about how, you know, some of the people they studied for it are big shot leaders at huge companies, you know, making billion-dollar decisions, all that stuff. And those people told these researchers, they said, the stuff that keeps me up at night is not the $1 million decisions. It's terminating employees. It's telling an employee they're not getting the promotion they want so badly. It's telling an employee that their darling project is getting taken away from them. So at all levels, at even the biggest organizations in the world, everybody struggles with those hard things. If it's something you struggle with as a leader, you are not alone. And hopefully this model can give you an idea of which quadrant you're operating in, which style you're using for your leadership, and you can start working on the skill building necessary to more often operate in a wise compassion style. And some of the people who have taken workshops where we present this to them tell us that learning this and developing skills with us at Real Custom Training has helped them be more of a wise and compassionate leader in the workplace. So thank you for listening this week. That's a little bit on compassionate leadership. I'm sure we'll revisit this topic in the future because there's a lot to it. And people tell us that it's really helpful in the workshops. So I figure it'll be helpful in the podcast as well. I appreciate you listening. Make sure you like and subscribe on Spotify or Apple Music. Subscribe to us on YouTube as well. If you want to watch on YouTube, you can see things like the Compassionate Matrix, Compassionate Leadership Matrix, and other visual aids that we put up. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn for more content, and tune in next week for another episode of Better Workdays. Thanks a lot.